If y'all eat this good every Saturday night, I'm coming back to town more often. That was awesome. Thank you. It's great to be back at Center Point. You are part of my church tradition. I was raised in your midst practically. I remember Saturdays working on your building when you were first being envisioned as a church family. So your church life is tied to mine. And you've been involved with me and my family in a number of ways over the years. And so whenever I get an excuse or an invitation to come back to be among you, it's just a joy. I'm really happy about the theme that you've selected for this week. The world is on God's heart, and you've already been hearing about it, and you're going to be hearing about it over the next days. Tomorrow, certainly, tonight, yes, and then in your small groups. So it's just great in every way, and it's an easy decision to come home to be back in your midst. So John encouraged me to take a few moments here at the beginning to unpack a little bit more about this vision that he and I, and really your pastoral staff and elders, have been such a part of. So let me give you an update. We believe that there are only 1,600 peoples around the world now that lack a missionary presence. So that doesn't mean that all of the other several thousand are all born again, that they all love the Lord, and that every individual in that people group would be a vibrant Christian. But it does mean that there's been a beginning in all of these other ethnicities, people group who share a language, share a worldview, share a religion. So there's a beginning in all of the thousands of other peoples except in these last 1,600. The 1,600 break down like this: 600 tribal peoples, a lot of them in the Amazon River Valley and throughout South America, also Africa, and parts of Asia. So 600 tribal peoples, 500 distinct Hindu people groups without a witness. They're all in India. There are other Hindu groups in other places around the world, but they are engaged by the global missionary community. 500 only remaining Hindu people groups without a chance. About 400 Muslim peoples around the world. And dear sister, is it Diane? That story that you told, praise the Lord. I mean, who would have thought, like as recently as 10 years ago, that, right? I mean, what the Lord is doing in the Muslim world today is just thrilling. So we're down to about 400 Muslim people groups without a missionary presence, and then 100 Buddhist and other peoples. So these are the 1,600 where the work is unbegun. We could say it this way: every unengaged people is unreached. But not every unreached people is unengaged. Some unreached peoples have been engaged by the global church. The word is become flesh and dwelt among them. We have engaged them. Now, they are unreached because a relatively few number have come to know Jesus, but they have a chance because they've been engaged by our missionaries that are here tonight and by others from around the world. Those are the engaged, unreached. But what has gripped the hearts of your leaders and others here in Southeast Virginia and in other places, thankfully, are these remaining unengaged, unreached. So the work hasn't yet begun there. The foundation hasn't yet been laid there. So a few of us have gotten together, and we've wondered, could it be that over the next few years, if God favored, that these remaining 1,600 could be engaged so that they might then be reached. You know, the goal isn't just getting a missionary presence, whether from nearby or far away. It's getting a missionary presence so that the work can actually begin. The goal is reaching so that the knowledge of the glory of the Lord might spread throughout the land, right? But before you can reach, we have to first engage. And there are, it seems, these 1,600 that are as yet unengaged. So here's the pitch. And so I'm in town for these days for two reasons. One is to be with you for your festival this weekend. That's one. And then the second is to pitch this idea to your sister churches. Is the Lord stirring here that would challenge our friends and other churches in the area to adopt a cluster of these 1,600? What would that look like? No one knows. Why? Well, no one has ever adopted them. No one has ever shown up, right? That's why they're unengaged. So if you choose to do this, you would be blazing a path that hasn't been blazed before. And I don't apologize for telling churches like yours, it may not be in your lane. You might not have the bandwidth for it. Not every church or person has this pioneering DNA. But I have a feeling that you do. Or that you could, especially in collaboration with other churches in town. So here's the idea, and John mentioned, so a couple nights ago, he and I were together. Do you know of Urban Discovery Ministries? And Johnsons? Of course they know about UDM. Their interest in basketball, their facility in basketball. So the idea would be this: a cluster of Southeast Virginia churches partnering with Urban Discovery Ministries using their basketball prowess and contacts, partnering with the local churches not among the unengaged peoples, because there aren't any churches among the unengaged by definition, right? But where would there be churches within a 100-mile radius who might partner with us in Virginia to send first workers, maybe from Chad, maybe from Laos, maybe from Peru, but you would be involved in praying and energizing. It shouldn't be too expensive. And providing the vision, the possibility, your pastors may come and visit, or other gifted ones. I heard some really interesting things during the different reports that could kind of nurture the work. So would the Lord be pleased to pull together this complex but doable vision and implement it so that we move from adoption in our hearts to engagement on the ground to reaching? It would be a miracle. But that signal is that we should do it. And so thank you. And I don't want to be melodramatic here or be overly spiritual. I've never been accused of being overly spiritual. If you did this, I don't want to minimize the difficulty. By definition, these unengaged haven't yet been served. And there are probably any number of good reasons. And you would be opposed by the enemy who hates all missionary work. He despises missionary work. He tries to shut it down where it already exists. And if you were he, smart and powerful, you would leverage your biggest guns against beginning something, wouldn't you? You bet you would. Because you would know that once the gospel enters into a people, it's going to win. Not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God into salvation for all who believe. And so we're going to proclaim Christ. We're going to preach Christ and live Christ, and people will hear and turn to him. So he's going to leverage, I just warn you, if you say yes to this, he will try to block it. So here's the deal. So I'm going to finish up, And I've also been invited to bring like a real message. So I'm going to do that when I'm done with this. Here's what it would look like. So we're already into the month of March, right? So John and I and some others, we're going to be talking it up among the sister churches in the consortium and outside. And we're going to give it a few months to see if, remember Genesis 1? The Spirit of the Lord hovering over the earth. And we've been at this, as John said, a year or two already. So we feel like that's sufficient time to prepare the soil. So now let's pass through the churches again, hover over Spirit, and just ask that you confirm whether this is a go or a no-go. If it's a no-go, that's okay. There are plenty of other good things to do, except that these peoples remain without a chance. That's the deal. So here's what I'd like us to do. Let's take just a moment here around your tables and let's cry out to the Lord. And here would be the prayer request. Lord, if you would like Centerpoint and our sister churches to say yes to this possibility of adopting a cluster of unserved peoples. Now, there's still, there's wiggle room. We still got to do our due diligence, and we'll have to consider what this would look like. And so we're not saying definitely yes yet. It'd be too premature. But we could say, Lord, if it would please you, over these next few months, would you confirm whether we should say yes to this in collaboration with UDM, our sister churches in the area? Mike would help make connections wherever in the world you choose to land and help you identify, do you want Muslim, Hindu, that kind of thing, what cluster to adopt. So Lord, would you just preside over this, and would you provide someone or ones, here's what would really be helpful, to kind of see this through, who would have a project management gift. Would that be the right term? Because you can imagine the political stones in the water that would have to be navigated. You have to talk with all the different churches and different missions committees and the leadership teams. You'd have to be are we going to go to Asia? Are we going to go to South America? So that the Lord would raise up someone with that management skill or a team that would see this thing through if there is a yes. So just pray with the people around your table. Don't sweat it. Just a couple of you pray, and then we'll continue. Go to prayer and ask the Lord to do what he will.
Okay. Yeah. Pretty excited. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you. Lord, just thank you for our church's involvement in sharing the gospel locally and throughout the world, Lord. And Lord, just thank you for how you've equipped people here and the sister churches, Lord. And so, Lord, we lift this opportunity up to you. And Lord, we do ask what our involvement would be, Lord, in supporting this, reaching the unengaged, Lord, unreached. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would prompt us, you would prompt, Father, those individuals that you would have to be working in this capacity. Lord, I pray that you would prompt leadership here to know if that's in your will, Lord, and your purpose for this congregation or the others in the consortium, Lord. And Lord, in praying that, Lord, you have put pieces together already in open.
Just another moment to wrap it up, please.
So we ask, Lord, that you would give that direction, that would be a clear direction, that we could move forward knowing that we're in your will. And Lord, if it's not, I pray you'd make that.
Lord, thank you for what you're doing among the nations. We're thrilling to be alive in this day, the day that many before us have prayed and longed to see. We're getting to hear the stories, and it's just thrilling to us. And now, Lord, if it would please you to use Centerpoint, kind of in the lead of churches in our region, to think about adopting and then engaging some way a cluster of these as yet unserved peoples, then you do it. You do it. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Okay. Hey, I mentioned that I really love the title of the theme that you've selected for the week, The World is on God's Heart. And it certainly is. I mean, brothers and sisters, what we're seeing among the nations today is really unprecedented. The number of people who are coming to know Jesus and the churches that are starting. Now, the churches don't have nice buildings like this, and they don't have large groups of people like this. They're house churches, and we might call them communities of Jesus or of Jesus followers. But the numbers of them are just incredible. And it's not just the conversions and the disciples that are being made. It's that missionary initiatives are now emerging from South America and Africa and India and Asia. Like, here's just one example, and it's fresh in my mind because a colleague of mine who's coming to join me tomorrow night for some meetings that we're having for the rest for next week, he's just back from India. Okay, so he's invited to New Delhi to speak with Muslim background believers, watch this, who are leaders of clusters of churches of Muslim background believers. So he's meeting with these believers to do some training in Discovery Bible Study, to give tools so that they can train their people and so forth. And also, watch this, to vision cast for the unengaged. Now, these lists of unengaged peoples come to us from the field. They're not generated in Richmond or Wheaton or Los Angeles or London. No, they come from the field, but they're imperfect, and they need to be continually assessed and upgraded, and we want to be as precise as we can be so that then guys like me can say as best as we know to churches like your own as you make your strategic deployment decisions. Okay, so my buddy Ken is now in New Delhi with these 15 Muslim background believer leaders from that whole region, gives them the list that he has generated from the field and so he's got 4 days with them. He asked them to evaluate the list. And of the 40 plus unengaged Muslim peoples in India, after 2 days of evaluating, they say, you know what? You're only off by a couple here. Which was great news. We could edit and upgrade, but I was so encouraged that that percentage of accuracy was being reflected in at least that list. Okay, but here, that's not the best part of the story. The best part of the story is what they said to him when it was time for him to go. Thank you for visiting our country and for spending these 4 days. This list is now our responsibility. This is the day that the Cuthrells, Senior, Caleb and Loretta, long to see. And that generation. They long to see it. And it's the day that you're living in. So one of the big issues then will be, like back to that other thing, if you were to say yes to this, then how would you partner with what we call it the proximate church? So it could be geographically or culturally approximate to the unserved people that we're going to serve. So how would we leverage through relationship, come alongside, help? What could be the way that we could help to see this done together? It's just a stunning day that we're in, and this is the world that's on God's heart. So my question for tonight and for tomorrow, we're going to pick it up from another passage tomorrow, but here's the issue that I'd like to present as we kind of close out for tonight, is this one. If the world is on God's heart, and we know that the way God tends to work to love on this world through people, then what process does God tend to take his people through so that they can make a dent in the universe? The world is on God's heart. So how does God so work so that the world becomes on the heart of his people? So I've selected a passage for tonight. It's a familiar one, Jason Arrington tells me, from Nehemiah 1 and 2, because Jason reminded me that years ago, he and I were part of a group that was going through this very book. So here's the deal. I've got 3 phases that God tends to take his children through so that the world can become on their heart. So we're going to share the 3, and then I'm going to ask you to, you evaluate this, you test this to see if it rings true for you, and then we'll just see what the Lord does with it. Okay, each time I'll state what I think is the principle, and then I'll read the passage and talk about it a little bit, and then you're going to be thinking, does this strike me as, is this what the passage is saying? Okay? So here's the first principle. For this God who has the world on his heart, as he prepares people, his children, to have the world on his heart, the first thing he has to do is to allow our heart to break over what breaks his heart. If he wants us to do what he does, we've got to feel what he feels by seeing what he sees. So, I'll bet you know the story of Nehemiah 1, many of you. So this guy's got a full-time job. He's a civil servant. He's serving in the executive branch of this government where he's lived. And he's got some friends from his home area of Jerusalem and his home country, and they're going to be in town. And so he asks about how are things going with the work of God back in our hometown. And here's what the people tell him. They say, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates are burned with fire. So it was when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. This guy is minding his own business at his job. And he comes to find out that the condition of God's people back home is devastating. They're discouraged. They're defeated. They've already come back from Babylonian exile. They were starting kind of to enjoy being a people again, but they've not only plateaued, but they've been declining, and the condition is terrible. The people are in a bad way, and the city itself, the walls are destroyed. They're broken down. There's been fire, and it's devastation. Now, why was this so important to Nehemiah? Because Nehemiah understood that the nation Israel in the Old Testament was to be a missionary nation, a kingdom of priests, to stand before God and the other kingdoms of the world, and to let the light shine so that the nations might discover how beautiful God is. And all of that in the Old Testament was symbolized by the temple and by the city of Jerusalem. So, when the temple is in disrepair and the people are defeated, then that means that God's witness among the nations is being blurred. And so he hears this. And there's no indication in the text that he was expecting to hear it. But he hears it, and he was undone. He's undone. And later on, when he's writing this book, he chooses these words to describe. I heard these words, I sat down. Like I'm just thinking, sometimes you get news, and you just need to sit. Or, someone has news to deliver, and on the phone you'll say, honey, sit down. Because there's going to be something heavy coming. I sat down and wept. To me, that word weeping, it's a deeper level of emotion than crying. Sat down, wept, mourned. For many days, we know, comparing the dates, that actually is many weeks. And he's just wrestling with the news that his, back to my point, his heart was starting to break because he knew God's heart must be broken for the devastation of his people right now that he did not know about. God knew about it, but he's just discovering. Okay, so then he starts praying. And this is an incredible prayer. It like fills up the rest of the whole first chapter of Nehemiah. And I think some of you kind of know this prayer. He starts confessing. He starts saying, God, this is like I'm putting myself into this too. And we've turned away from you as a people. And this that we're seeing in the physical domain is but a representation of what's really been going on in the spiritual, in our relationship with you. And God, we're a mess. And God, I'm sorry, but now I've become aware of this. And so towards the end of the prayer, he says this very interesting thing. Now, God, your word says that when you're a people or in a situation like this, if they come back to you, you will come back to them. So God, now hear the prayer that your servant and servants pray. We're not told in the text who these others are, and I always am so glad when I'm like going to be with an audience like you, and I'm reading a passage that I've read before, but when I see something new, I had never noticed in all these years that Nehemiah must have had some tribe with him sharing the load. And that was just an encouragement to me all of a sudden. I was just surprised by it. Hear the prayer that I and your servants pray, and then he says this, give me success with this man today. And we don't know what that means. And we're not going to know until the beginning of the next chapter, which we'll get to pretty quickly. But I just want to pause and say, before we get into chapter 2 and what happens with the next part of the story, do you agree that God had to find someone on the earth whose heart would break for what breaks his heart? And so I just want to pause. I know you don't know me, and I don't know you, but this is a safe place, right? And so I just want to ask this question with no preordained weirdness. What's breaking your heart tonight? That may be a hint of what's next for you in his service. You'd have to test it out. You'd have to, spend some time thinking, processing with him about it, and maybe your loved ones. But I don't think I've ever seen anything powerful done in the Lord's service apart from a broken heart early on. So what's breaking your heart? Maybe it's something, I was really encouraged to hear the different reports. There were campus ministries, more than one that I heard about tonight. Is it students that's on your heart or children? I heard this week that your building is packed during the week with kids, right? I was so encouraged to hear that. So are boys and girls on your heart? Do they tug at your heart and you see the opportunity that's here to introduce them as worshipers to the Lord? Is that what's on your heart? Is it college students? It's a couple of us, I think, are doing military ministry here, which makes sense given our area. Is it the military that's on your heart? What about all these global workers that you're going to be hanging out with tonight and tomorrow, and all of the places where they serve? You're going to be hearing their stories, and you've already heard their stories. When you hear those stories, does your heart do a little flip-flop? And you're wondering, hey, well, that was interesting. I think I'll follow up with her. And see, all of those are hints of what God might have for your future. And it's between him and you to work it out, and it's glorious, it's wonderful. So don't prejudge what it might be, but just say yes to the possibility. Lord, I offer you my heart, and I'm willing to have it crack. If you'll speak to me and show me kind of where my trajectory might be. And I just would say this, that if It's okay if nothing comes to mind right away, like something that really breaks your heart. That's okay too. Just be honest with the Lord. Just say, Lord, the guy's up there saying that my heart needs to break, and I'm not aware of it breaking over anything, but I'll say this. If you want to burden me for some area of service that I might explore, then I'm open to that. So touch my heart and bring it into alignment with yours, and I'll trust you for the results. So that's the first thing. That's the first phase that God brings us through to bring us to the point that the world will be on our hearts like it is on his heart. He breaks our heart over things that break his. All right, here's the second one. I love this one. He envisions with us a way forward. Our heart's broken, we're wrestling before him, and then he envisions with us a way forward. Listen, God's not perplexed about what needs to happen. He's not frantic. He's not pushed. He's not unaware. He's the one who empowers. So here's how it works out for Nehemiah. And some of you who know the story, this will resonate with you. So remember the prayer at the end of chapter 1? Lord, your word says that if your people will come back to you, you'll return to them. All right, give me favor now with my boss, because he's in a place of influence, and I just have a feeling that he's part of my future. So he shows up with the king the next day. He's serving the king his wine. Nehemiah is distressed. He's sad. So the king goes, hey, what's with the sad face? And Nehemiah says, why wouldn't I be sad? What I've just heard is happening among my people, the people of God. It's distressing. So the king says, the king is putting all this together, and he's going, well, Nehemiah even says, he says, I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire? Then the king said to me, what do you request? Beloved, this is so important. We know from comparing the date of Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, with the date of Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1, that the duration of chapter 1 of all of the wrestling with the Lord, the crying out, the wondering, it was 4 months. 4 months. I'm going to give you 4 months to decide about the unengaged. But in this time, it was 4 months. 4 months of processing. 4 months of grieving. So 4 months of wondering. 4 months of praying. And what seems to have happened is that over time, watch this, some ideas start to come. How do we know this? Because watch what happens in this one interaction with the king. Hey, man, what's with the sad face? Well, I have reason to be sad. My hometown, my country, the work of God on the earth is plateaued and declining. I have reason to be sad. What do you want to do about it? Here's what he says. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my fathers, that I may rebuild it. Somewhere in those 4 months, amidst all of his, can you imagine his inadequacies that he was feeling? He'd never done anything like this before. But somewhere over that time, he said, God, oh no, God, not that. Or, okay, God, I think you're directing me to do something about this situation. So that he could stand before the king and say, you're asking me what I want? Here it is. You send me back to my town. I'm going to address that situation for the glory of God. But what strikes me about this, not only his audacity in that request, then immediately, well, the king says, well, how long are you going to be gone? And he gives him a time. And then Nehemiah, I'm thinking the king thinks conversation's over. Okay? This was a very important conversation. I found out what was troubling my guy here, and he's asked for, permission to go do something about the situation. Case closed. Then Nehemiah says, okay, O king, here's what I need from you more. I need letters of transit. I need letters of permission for timber and all that will be required to rebuild the guardhouse, to rebuild the walls, and I and my assembly need a place to live. So I need provision for all of these things. Now, here's what I'm suggesting, and the text doesn't say it, so I'll back away from the holy place right here, but I think this is what really was happening. During those months, the idea started to form in his heart so that when the curtain went up and he was given opportunity to speak what was on his heart, he was ready. He was ready. He goes, bam, bam, I need this, 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 and this. He was ready. So here's the application for me, and here would be my question for you. Give God time to allow the dream to consolidate in your mind. He's gotten your attention about something. He's given you a burden for something. Now, what's going to be your plan of action? Nothing changes until something changes. How are you going to change things? What's going to be your first step? What's going to be your second? You may not know the second until you take the first. My friends have a statement that I love, which is, if you can't see very far ahead, go ahead as far as you can see. So in my own experience, sometimes the plan is pretty clear, but it never works out that way. And so we just take the first step, and then we take the next, and then we take the next. So I want to say that in your personal life, in your family, in your work, in your ministry, in your church life, that if you will allow God's heart to come in alignment with your heart and give it time, and you cry out with him, with your trusted friends, a plan will emerge. And I like to think that the friends that were referenced in chapter 1 were part of this plan coming together. I think that's the way it happened. So that's number 2. Envision a way forward, and the Lord will help you to do that. So here's the third thing that happens. He enables us to act. He enables us to act. I mean, we need to take as long as we need to envision, and then the time comes when it's time to move forward. So Nehemiah makes the trip back to Jerusalem, and if you know the story, he rested for 3 days. I call it, he caught his breath. And you need to do that in the Lord's service. There's a season of activity, and then you need a breather to kind of collect yourself. And then he builds a team, because chapter 2, verse 12 says he takes a few men with him to examine the actual condition of the town. He checks out his hypotheses with empirical evidence. He heard a narrative from his friends of what the condition was, but he wanted to see it for himself. That's why you need to scout out opportunities. You go and look for yourself. Does the real life evidence measure up to what I've heard? So you remember he had that midnight ride late at night with his friends, and he was checking out the situation. And he doesn't say too much too soon. I've always been intrigued that in chapter 2, verse 16, he takes the time to say, you know what? I didn't share this idea with just everybody, because not everybody is prepared to receive it, right? So, and then when the time is right, he unapologetically, without minimizing the challenge, here's what he says to the people, and this will be the last passage that I referenced. So he's gone through all these phases, he's checked out the condition, and then he says to the people, you see the distress we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come, let us build the wall that we may no longer be approached. It will no longer be a reproach to the people of God on this earth. Let's do this so that his glory, his beauty, and his love for all the world can be reestablished and reinvigorated. So it was the time for action. And then the rest of the book of Nehemiah, chapters 3 to 13, is just the outworking. All right, let me wrap it up this way. The world is on God's heart. That's your theme for the week. Because it is, how does God prepare his daughter or his son to have that world on his heart and her heart? Through these three phases. First, he brings their hearts into alignment with his. And that typically means a breaking. And then there's a season to envision a way forward. You need to take as long as you need for that season, but not longer than you need. And that's part of the fun of it, because you don't know how long is too long, how short is too short, but you're walking with the Lord in this, and he's making the way clear with your friends as you go through it. And then when the curtain goes up, you act. Three things to close out that speak to me from this story, and I hope will with you. Number one, let's allow ourselves to be surprised. Nehemiah was surprised that day, and it changed the trajectory of his life. How open are we to being surprised? Second, don't be afraid. The scripture specifically says in chapter 2 here, in that key moment when the king upped the ante, hey, what's bugging you? It says that he was terribly afraid. But he moved through that fear. So that's what I mean when I say don't be afraid. I said that poorly, didn't I? I should have said, don't let our fears keep us back from what's in our heart to do. He was terribly afraid. But see, he had 4 months of waiting on the Lord. And so he was ready to speak. So let's not let our fears, hey, I'm afraid. I'm afraid in so many areas, and those who know me best would be able to testify of it. So that's okay. But let's not allow those fears to overwhelm us. The Lord is with us and will help us, as he was with Nehemiah. And the third is this. Let's allow the process to play out in its own time. I think I've referenced this already. You can't force the work of God. And Pastor Chris, if you're in the room, I want to thank you for that breakfast that we had this morning, in which you challenged me in your typically gracious way. Mike, it's bigger than you. Give it over to the Lord. I was talking with him about this 1600. So we allow the process to play out in its own time, and we'll give it the time that it needs, but not too much. All right, the world is on God's heart. You bet it is. And that's what we're thinking about during the festival. And he's going to prepare you to share his heart and make a difference in that world. That's Centerport's history. That's your heritage. That's your reputation in this town. And that will be your future also. Pastor Dan?
Sam, we're